there's no way we're hiring a white male person.
It's kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken.
Closing the book on the Arby's franchise, which opened on January 5th of 1969.
Stop talking to thin white men.
Disney's woke racism gets exposed, more economic carnage in California, and a self-described fat queer TikToker has thoughts on skinny gay men. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my daily podcast where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics and across the internet from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and sticking around. We don't bite, we're growing really fast and building an awesome community here. And if you're a returning viewer, you already know what I'm going to say. Don't forget to hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Before we get into things, a quick programming announcement. There won't be any show this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, as I'm taking a few days off for some personal time. Try not to miss me too much, and we'll be back with more Brad vs. Everyone on Friday. Now, before we get into our heavy-hitting topics for the day, I want to show you guys something funny that made me proud to be an American. The US is telling France to screw off and is bringing its own air conditioners to the Paris Olympics, cutting against the organizers' goals for a green-friendly environment where they were going to let the rooms be a temperature of 73 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit and simply equip them with fans. Yeah, that's crazy and pointless, and guys, don't forget that most people in Europe don't have air conditioning. I love that the US was just like, nah, screw that, and is just bringing their own AC. I saw this really funny tweet where somebody was like, I'm proud to be an American where at least we have AC. Anyway, on to our serious stuff for today. Our first topic is kind of alarming because Disney, one of the most significant corporations in America, just got exposed for pretty flagrant woke racism. The James O'Keefe Media Group just published an undercover sting video where they spoke with a high-level Disney executive, and he admitted to some pretty damning anti-white male bias inside the company. Also, side note, guys, when are people going to stop falling for these stings? If you're a 5 and all of a sudden a 10 is chatting you up and trying to get coffee to you and asking you about your job, it's James O'Keefe. Anyway, let's watch some of the clip, which features a senior vice president and team lead at the Walt Disney Company named Michael Giordano.
Certainly, there have been times where, there's no way we're hiring a white male person.
It's kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken, but
How would they say it?
there's no way we're hiring a white male person. They'd say
Like straight to you? Or, okay.
They'd be very careful how they message that to agents.
According to these videotapes, Disney blatantly discriminates against whites, white men in particular.
I think I'm sort of well prepared for it. I'm well positioned for it. But as far as Disney's concerned, I'm a white male. That's not who they're looking to promote at the moment.
As a white guy, even Michael has his own doubts about the possibility for advancement for himself at Disney. In fact, Michael actually got to experience Disney's discrimination against white males firsthand.
I've been at the company 11 years now, so I have friends in HR and I have friends in those divisions, and they're like, look, nobody else is going to tell you this, Mike, but they're not considering any white males for the shop. They're just not. That's not what they want.
They even passed over a qualified half-black person for a promotion because they didn't look black enough.
We wanted to hire somebody in the department a few years ago now who was half black, but didn't appear half black. And there was a creative executive who was like, we're not, that's not what's wrong. They wanted somebody in meetings who would appear a certain way, and he wasn't gonna bring that to the meeting. I mean, it kind of feels like we're, at some point there's going to be a lawsuit.
So this is ugly, ugly stuff. It's pure racism, pure reverse discrimination, bizarrely being done in the name of progress. But I wanted to try to find some data to see, is this at all pervasive? Or is this just one person's experience at one company. What I found wasn't reassuring. A 2022 resume builder survey of 1,000 hiring managers had some concerning results. 52% believe that their company practices reverse discrimination in hiring. 1 in 6 have been asked to deprioritize hiring white men. 48% have been asked to prioritize diversity over qualifications. 53% believe their job will be in danger if they don't hire enough diverse employees, and 70% believe their company has DEI initiatives, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, for appearance's sake. So the evident discrimination against white males inside at least some parts of Disney isn't a total outlier, but unfortunately it's part of a broader trend in some businesses that are run by woke activists and young ideologues to openly discriminate on the basis of race and sex, but this time do it in the opposite direction and call yourself a social justice warrior or something. First and foremost, I can't even believe that I have to explain this, but it's just wrong. It's immoral to discriminate against people or treat them differently because of their immutable characteristics, like their skin pigment or their chromosomes. It doesn't make them more or less qualified to do any job. And while obviously there's a much more negative and extensive history of this kind of discrimination being done against black people and other racial minorities than white people, the immorality of the act doesn't somehow change just because the targets have changed. It's also definitely illegal because federal law clearly states that you're not allowed to discriminate in employment on the basis of race or gender or sex, but they're pretty clearly doing that. So one way we might see this come out in the wash and learn more about this over time, or hopefully see it come to an end, is through massive lawsuits. Even this employee admitted in that clip that he expects Disney to get sued over this at some point. And there's another important angle to this, which is how demeaning and tokenizing this is to minorities. Everyone deserves equal opportunity and fairness, and whether the best person for a job is white or black or a different race, or whether they're a woman or a man, they deserve that job, and those things should never be an aspect that holds somebody back. But people also shouldn't be put into positions they otherwise wouldn't get on the merits just as tokens. That's insulting and bigoted to them. And you end up with these perverse situations where Disney's not promoting a half-black person because they don't look black enough. The reductionist and frankly evil ideology that has to have clouded your brain to ever engage in that kind of thought process is really something. None of this is progressive in any meaningful sense of the word. On the contrary, it's anti-progress. Racial progress means moving America closer towards racial harmony, the vision that Martin Luther King Jr. so famously laid out, where people are judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. He didn't ever say we need to live in America where white people get judged on the content of their skin. No. He dreamed of a day when little black kids and little white kids would grow up and play together, and race would fade into the background and become an afterthought. But when you engage in reverse discrimination, you actually unintentionally or intentionally re-emphasize racial divisions as a meaningful category between human beings. And you foster grievances between the racial groups, because you'll have white males who, in some cases rightly, in some cases wrongly, will believe they're being discriminated against, or a diversity pick is getting the job promotion that they want, or all these things that don't increase racial harmony, they fuel racial division and the politics of grievance. It's interesting that the same kind of people who push policies like this or take this kind of identitarian progressive approach to issues also bemoan the rise of the far right or alt-right, the misogynist or the edgelord racist white men, which I think is a pretty niche group online, but does exist. Yet they don't seem to see how their own politics and approach to these issues fuels the rise of that group. Still, I'm not really buying into the narrative that you'll hear in right-wing circles that white males are somehow an oppressed class now. Anywhere this kind of anti-white, anti-male discrimination is occurring, that's horrible and it's wrong. But there's still plenty of opportunity for people, and I don't think there's nearly enough of this going on to start viewing ourselves as helpless victims or anything of the sort. And so I do reject that kind of thinking when you see it on the right attached to these issues. That's just my take on this. Let me know what you think, and Are you still engaging in anything Disney puts out? Between the woke content, the disturbing business practices, I'm not seeing a lot of positive value left in this once great American company. But that's just me. I want to hear from you guys in the comments, and don't forget to like the video while you're at it. Up next, more economic fallout in California after the state's $20 minimum wage for restaurants has come into effect. This time, it's Arby's shutting down a famous location. So where's the beef? Apparently, not in Hollywood anymore. Dun-dun-dun-ch. Pardon the dad joke. I had to do it. Let's go to KTLA 5 for some local coverage.
It's an end of an era over on Sunset Boulevard. An Arby's restaurant just a couple of blocks from our studio is closing today after 55 years. All that plywood closing the book on the Arby's franchise, which opened on January 5th of 1969. Once it was the only fast food restaurant on Sunset Boulevard that actually had a view of the Hollywood sign. But nature and urban evolution has put a sunset on that view, and now the Arby's roast beef number 150 is closing. 91-year-old original owner Marilyn Leviton shares her emotions and thoughts on the store's demise.
Truth is, I think it was the pandemic that did us in. I really feel we would have closed during the pandemic, except for the federal loans. Arby's is demanding more technical equipment, which we couldn't afford. And I don't think the $20 an hour wage increase helped either. I'm awfully sorry that it came to this. I think we did a good job for 55 years.
And Marilyn added that she's afraid other fast food franchises now may have to suffer a similar fate.
Yeah, and she's not just speculating. We've covered on this show, and there's been ample news reports of many different fast food locations and other restaurants having to shut down operations recently in California, or at least close some of their stores, in part due to this $20 minimum wage increase for the restaurant workers. And I love that she brought up the pandemic in this interview because I feel like we're memory holing a lot of the damage that was done by the government during that time. I mean, just in the first year of the COVID pandemic, 200,000 businesses permanently closed that will never reopen. And it wasn't really just because of the pandemic, but more so the government's policies in response to it, by mandating that people stay at home, by closing businesses, and by taking a heavy-handed approach to it all. That didn't end up being particularly effective in many cases because actually most COVID spread happened at home. And of course, as far as the minimum wage increase contributing to the decline of this classic business, I don't want to say I told you so because it just feels crappy. This whole situation is crappy. But if Governor Gavin Newsom had ever picked up that book behind me or just listened to all the people like me that warned against this policy, all this destruction could have been avoided. But instead, they're going to continue to bleed jobs and bleed residents and bleed wealth from the Golden State and continue to strangle the golden goose of enterprise and business that has made the state successful in the first place. I just hope that more classic businesses and famous sites don't have to be ruined and destroyed or put out of business before they wake up, smell the roses, and reverse their course. But I worry that's exactly what's going to happen. You let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you even like Arby's? I'm not sure I've even actually had that. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Make sure you're subscribed and don't forget to hit that like button as we go along to reward my suffering. I incur permanent brain damage from these videos, so the least you can do is reward me with a like. Today, we're going to take a look at a self-described fat queer TikToker who thinks that fat queers are more interesting than skinny white gays. Us evil, evil people.
Something I was not prepared for as a queer man was the unseasoned queer men with...
I've seen way too many of these posts, so I felt like I should talk on it. Stop talking to thin white men. Oh, they're boring? Oh, they're unseasoned? Yeah, no duh. They're not interesting because they're basically not needing to be interesting. They're just worshipped for being and looking the way that they do, so they don't have to have anything behind those eyes. And many of them don't. Not saying all, but many. Start talking to fat queer men because we're far more interesting than any of those people.
First, I don't know that I've ever been described as unseasoned before. That's a new one for me, y'all. And maybe it's just me, but even as a skinny white man, I don't know that I've ever actually been worshipped just because of the way that I look. I think that might only happen in this fella's fantasies. I also find it bizarre and really unpleasant that anyone would suggest that some demographic groups of people are inherently more interesting than others. I know lots of people with great personalities who are really funny, who are, not super thin. They are not fall into that category of skinny men that he is so jealous of, evidently. But there's also plenty of boring overweight people, and vice versa. There's plenty of interesting thin people and not so interesting thin people. You're not actually progressive if you suggest that people's personalities are dictated by their characteristics. And honestly, the whole video just reeks of jealousy. For audio listeners, just for descriptive purposes, this individual is, we'll just say, not the thing that he's criticizing. And that clearly pains him. He's clearly not very happy with himself or with how he's perceived by others. And he's decided to take that out by discriminating against and venting against an entire demographic group of people who haven't done anything wrong except simply exist the way we are. That's a crappy way to treat people or talk about people, but ultimately I have some compassion for him because it's clearly coming from a place of deep-rooted envy and jealousy and insecurity. He also, of course, has pronouns in bio, which, as I've said, is always how you know you're about to see the worst take of your life. And apparently he doesn't see the cognitive dissonance in anything that he's saying, because in a follow-up video, he doubled down on the inconsistency.
Some people were mad that I made generalizations about the skinny gay community in my last video. And honestly, how dare I make generalizations about a whole community? It's not like the fat and plus size community gets that done to them every time that they walk into any place ever. And it's literally proven because I get multiple comments about it. People out themselves saying, oh, I would never date a fat person because they're unhygienic, because they're lazy, because they're not as active. And I'm like, bullshit, you didn't get to even know them. How the do you know? You don't. You're making generalizations. So I made a generalization, and I will stop making generalizations about thin people when fat and plus size people get afforded the same courtesy.
So this was really bizarre to me because I don't know how somebody can articulate what he's just articulated in this video and not see the inconsistency. I agree with him that if you're going around saying that fat people are all unhygienic, or you're assuming people are unhygienic because they're overweight, that's not fair. That's not true. That's unfair and it's discriminatory. But if you're calling out behavior that you view as immoral and wrong and unfair, to then adopt that same exact behavior in retaliation is to knowingly embrace immoral and unfair behavior. That's immoral. You are becoming the very same thing that you say you hate, that you say you're opposed to. And in fact, just reinforcing that practice rather than leading by example and opposing that kind of blanket thinking and stereotyping and discrimination, you're doing it too. And it's such a childish way. I'll stop when you stop is such a childish way to approach immoral interpersonal interactions. Anyway, to this dude, I'm sorry if people are making nasty generalizations towards you, but you lose some of my sympathy because you're doing the same exact thing right back in the other direction, and don't seem to get how much of a hypocrite that makes you. I hope you can wake up, stop doing this, and come to accept yourself better, either by improving your health and becoming more comfortable with what you see in the mirror, or just through improving your own self-esteem and self-confidence so you don't feel the need to tear down others to try to cover up for your own insecurities. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below, and if I'm just missing the point because of my skinny white male privilege or something. And now, before we wrap up today's episode and take a break for a couple days, because remember, the next episode will be on Friday. There won't be any episode Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, as I'll be off for personal time. I'll read a few of your comments that you left on the last episode. One person says, "Are you a Swiftie?" No, I'm not a Swiftie, but I'm also not a Taylor Swift hater. I've criticized her for a couple things. I like some of her music, but I'm not like a diehard fan. But I also think a lot of the hate for her is deranged and delusional. Hope that clears it up. Another person says, you don't like cats? Okay. I know you didn't know about it yet, but the wedding is off. Okay. Another person writes, I'm normally impressed by your level of research, Brad, but I must call you out for saying we Canadians do not have freedom of speech. Yes, we do. It is guaranteed in Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in our Constitution. I agree that the American definition is better than ours, but we still have the most important part, the right to criticize the government without fear or reprisal. So I think you misunderstood me. I understand that Canadians might have free speech in writing, but in practice, when you have hate speech laws and when you have so many laws that criminalize speech, despite whatever your legal charters say, those laws are still enforced and upheld, you don't have free speech as a country in Canada. I'm not saying you're as bad as the most totalitarian regimes in the world, but you don't have free speech when the government can still punish you for hate speech. Sorry, that's just my take on it. Another person said, in quotes, guns are used far more times in self-defense every year in the United States than in violent crimes. They write, really? Where did you get that tidbit? All you have to do is watch your local news to hear about daily gun violence. When someone is defending themselves, it gets massive coverage and is quite rare. So I don't just say things without having them backed up. I got that tidbit from the Institute of Medicine, a study which a few years back reported that estimates of defensive gun use in the United States range from anywhere between 500,000 annual instances to 2 million, and that comes in the context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms in a year. So yes, defensive gun use is far more common than violent crimes involving guns. The reasons that violent crimes involving guns might get more local news coverage is because people are more likely to have died, where a lot of defensive gun use simply involves brandishing a firearm to scare someone. Sometimes the gun's not even shot. So I hope that helps explain the discrepancy and where I got that information from. Another person says, I've watched so much of your content that I yelled at my cat to put down the crack pipe when she was tearing around my room like a maniac. I love that so much. Reggie, next time you're being bad, Daddy's gonna tell you to put down the crack pipe, okay? Okay. This next comment, I'm not gonna lie, it made me laugh out loud. What's the difference between gay and queer? About 50 pounds. Funny. When we're speaking in all seriousness, we don't support generalizations about any group of people. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't yet. Don't forget to hit that like button before you go to reward my suffering through all the brain rot. And do comment with your thoughts on this episode. I do read the comments and I'll pick a few to respond to in the next episode. Oh, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to rate and review us. It really helps. And with that, we'll talk again on Friday.